So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I'm so thankful to the Academy of Art San Francisco as well as the Metals Art Guild for hosting me here. And my contact has been Kelly Netterman, who's just a delight to work with and try to pull this off. And Kelly asked me what would be the title of your talk, and I usually do an artist talk, and I thought, I'll do something different. So recently I'd been thinking about the idea of paradise. Gave this lecture the title Paradise. And I travel a lot, and I think I used to believe that paradise was a place or possibly objects, but upon reflection, I've sort of started to figure out that for me, paradise is really people or sort of communities that I build. And learning about people, the way they live their life, what they eat, everything about them is just what I'm really passionate about. And the objects that I make and the objects that other people make are a way for us to begin a conversation and foster a dialogue and possibly start a friendship together. So I'm starting this talk sort of at the end and then going back to the beginning. And I'll just try to sort of interweave some of my ideas about what paradise is and could be. So I'm currently on my sabbatical year, and we just got back from 3 months traveling in India. And looking back on the photos of India, you know, it's just like unbelievable architecture, these beautiful spaces. This is like a wild wedding mobile that blasts music, and it's hand-tooled tin, and this is a carved marble Jain temple where every single column is different. None are the same. This is like sort of an altarpiece for Durga, so the Durga Puja festival, and these are ceramic effigies that are made and painted. This is 50 kilos of real silver. And when this festival is done, then these sculptures are thrown into the water, not the silver, just the sculpture. This is the mirror palace in Jaipur, then the Amber Fort, and this is a close-up because you guys are jewelers. Chandigarh. This is a Buddhist, early Buddhist temple on a Buddhist campus in Orissa, and that's carved granite there, and just the amazing kind of functioning chaos of India. That's the animals everywhere. And of course, the beautiful objects. And in this example of textiles, the utilitarian objects, this bird cage and this like beautiful handmade fan. And of being a jeweler in Jaipur, because I did a lecture there, I got to see some behind the scenes goldsmithing workshops. And these are examples of the Kundin Mina enameling and engraving that are just, it kind of blows your mind. But when I got back home to Washington, D.C., I received this parcel that I had sent myself with $200 worth of 5-cent stamps sort of covering the whole parcel. And I sort of opened it up, and there were these materials I had purchased and objects and craft and art, and it just was sort of bereft of life. It didn't really hold anything for me. And reflecting on the experience, I came to sort of realize that it just really was the people that were so fascinating. We got to talk to this gentleman who was making chai cups with just a kick wheel, and the whole day making cups that are like exactly the same, perfectly made, working outside, his family running around beside him. Here I got to work at a textile factory and shadow some craftsmen there, and we did block printing and indigo dyeing. These are the flower markets in Kolkata, just going really early in the morning to understand that tradition. The other picture is on the banks of the Ganges in Varanasi. We were there for 3 months, but for 5 weeks, I was in an artist residency called Rice, and I told them that I would tell everybody about the residency because you can apply to this 2 times per year. This was an amazing experience. We got to live in a small heritage craft village for 5 weeks, and every week we worked with a different craftsman or crafts family, and they'd usually been doing their work for 150 years. So this was the president of the village. He taught us stone carving. One weekend, a tribal craftsman came down from far away, and he taught us dongra bronze casting, sort of a lost wax process that can probably never ever be duplicated, because this wax was just like the most amazing brown wax I ever used. And I was like, oh, where do you get this? And he's like, oh, well, we collect it from the wild bees. Like, oh, okay, that's going to be hard to find in Nova Scotia. And then when we put the clay on the pieces to do like the burnout, I'm like, oh, this clay is awesome. You know, what is it? He's like, it's the white sand from anthills when they burrow into the earth and they make that. I'm like, okay, this will be just an India experience. This craftsperson taught us how to do palm leaf engraving, which is very detailed, and my son was with us, and he learned how to do a type of dance that was very particular to that village. And I never thought I would learn how to make cow dung toys, but I did. And I got to teach the kids in the village pop-up books, which I do in a lot of places that I don't speak the language, because people are usually pretty open to learning something new. And yeah, just looking back on the pictures, there's no people in this one, but this was like an itinerant family that moved across the land and worked on different farms. They negotiated with a farmer and used their local clay to make bricks, and they could make like 5,000 bricks a day. This was like a animal aid, which is a hospice for ill cows. And of course, whenever I could, I went into different goldsmithing workshops and got to talk with the craftspeople there. And this goldsmith taught me how to use those like carved Indian dye stamps that they have. This is another really interesting tradition in India, which is these lac bangles, which is sort of a resin that's twisted around a bangle form, and that it did not look easy to learn, and it was not easy to learn. Then I did lectures at a couple schools in India, and that was always a great experience to be able to meet the students there and see kind of what they're working on. And I haven't really had time to process the India experience there. It's really kind of unique, and it will take a while, and it already has a very rich culture of its own. But I think for me, the idea of light traveling through form and through space is what sort of intrigued me the most, and I think that will be what I pursue later. So when I think about my practice as a whole, I was fortunate in the past year that American Craft decided to write a profile about me, and when the writer contacted me, she said, I looked at your work and I don't really understand. It all looks so different. And, you know, it kind of gave me pause to think. I mean, of course I was hoping, I've been spending all these years making the work. You're the writer. Like, can't you give me some insight? But I do work in different series and groupings, and I usually have a set of questions that I'm trying to resolve for myself in tandem with like a veracity for uncovering new materials and new processes. And I'm really very thankful, and I feel like it's a unique position to be a jeweler. We make these objects that sort of form a bond between the maker and the wearer. There's a conversation between those two people, and then our objects go out in the world and sort of, they're like a hello, my name is sign. They sort of say a little bit about the person, and I think that's really unique for jewelers. It's a little different from sculpture and other practices, so that's very important to me. the history, just a little bit of my history. I went to RISD for my undergrad, and I moved to New York City after graduating and worked as a professional goldsmith for 5 years. Worked in a couple different shops, including Reinstein Ross. And in those 5 years, I really became pretty technically proficient, but I didn't find I had enough time around the edges to make my own work. So in 2000, I applied to the Akademie der Bildenden Kunst in Munich, Germany, and I left for Munich. It's the icon of Germany. And these are the hallways at the Kunstakademie in Munich. And this is just a picture of a Klassenbesprechen, which is the sort of class talk that I can talk to, if there's interested students, I can talk to you more later about this, but it's a really unique program in that Otto Kinsley, our professor, he had this idea to like draw students from everywhere and just try to get the best students, and then like his work was done. That was it. So we had a place to work, and you just talked about your work 1 time per year. So everybody, it was just, we met 1 time a week. Every person had 1 talk. Your talk was 1 time per year. So other than that, you were just getting feedback from, your fellow students. And I guess the idea was we were just working together. I think in hindsight, actually, the idea was just sink or swim. Like if you're going to be a professional artist or goldsmith, you're just going to either do it or not. This was an example of like if an artist would come to give a talk, we'd all make a big soup and have beer and everything for lunch. And when I first got to Munich, I definitely struggled a little bit. My work was quite tight after working professionally for 5 years. And, at that time, like Helen Britton or like Lisa Walker were working at the Academy. And I don't know if you know Lisa Walker's work, but we were having a critique, and I picked up a brooch of hers, and the pinback fell off, and I was like, "Oh, Lisa, I broke it. I'm sorry." And she said, "Oh, Rebecca, don't worry. Let me like glue gun that back on before I send it to the gallery." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I had been working professionally, and a lot of people had been in academia their whole life, so their work was at a really different place than mine was. So I just did free collages, experiments. These were some early earrings I made from plates that I found in my apartment. You can see this interest in silhouettes is kind of developing. And I was sort of bicycling around like crazy and exploring these like new surroundings. They're very different from where I grew up in suburban Virginia. And I just sort of began to love these like roof lines, and these forms could be found in a lot of different objects and decoration and ironwork. And I was taking photos back in the old way with a SLR camera, and taking these photos back to my studio and sort of cutting them apart and putting them back together to make new jewels. And I think that idea of like kind of construction and reconstruction, it's a good metaphor for Germany. There's always, you'll see a beautiful cathedral, but when you go inside, there's like black and white photos of the history and the destruction and things that have happened there. So this series of work, it's photographs that are put together with plexiglass on the front and metal working on the back. And for me, it's always really important that the person who wears the piece or owns the piece has kind of an experience that nobody else has. So the backs always have something kind of unique for that person to enjoy. And then there's the idea of the facades, like what goes on outside and inside. So these are these sort of Bavarian, like faux hunting clothing. And that was the photography series. And when the early years when I lived in Germany, I always went back to New York in the summer to work and earn money. But after September 11th, I decided I had sort of a different feeling, and I would stay in Europe that summer. And I decided to do a pilgrimage walk. So I walked on the Kamino de Santiago, which is sort of an ancient pilgrimage route that it's sort of, I walked, in the Pyrenees Mountains between France and Spain all the way to Santiago, but a lot of people in Europe just leave their front door and they start walking. So you'll meet people from the Netherlands or Russia who just sort of walked. So people, a lot of people have walked this road, Charlemagne, Shirley MacLaine, lots of people. When you do this walk, you don't need a map or anything. You just pay attention to the shells that are nailed everywhere. And it's amazing. Like, it's amazing if you ever have like a chunk of time where you can do this, to just walk slowly across a country. Like, not even bicycling, but just walking to see the ruins and the agricultural fields in the middle, like the La Rioja region where the wine grows, and there's bigger cities like Lyon here, and this is a ruin that we slept in. And of course, the most amazing thing about this walk is the people. So anybody who's sort of taken 40 days out of their life to walk is usually experiencing a change, going through a divorce, starting a new company, something like that. And it's just like the most interesting group of people that you'll ever meet. And you like languages, all different languages, but we would share a meal together in the evening. And the middle was quite dry, and Galicia was quite wet. And this is right at the end at Santiago. I actually ended up meeting my husband 5 days before the end, so that's us walking into Santiago. That's the fittest we'll ever be on that day. And when I did this walk, I had been, again, interested in these silhouette forms, and there's a German folk art tradition called Scherenschnitt, which is to just cut out the outlines of a form. And I had brought my journal with me and a little set of embroidery scissors. And every day when I walked, I cut like a plant or a flower, pressed it in my journal. That night I would cut out its silhouette and discard the original. So at the end of the journey, I had, for me it was 40 days, for other people 30 days. It's like 40 days and nights of these plants and flowers. And I didn't know if they were done or not when they're in their paper form, but I ended up finding a sort of very thin rubber that architects use, and piecing together the chains in different ways and cutting out these necklaces that I called Kamino Necklaces. And this is one that I made just one time that's got every single flower from the whole journey, and it's laid out on the shape of the walk to Santiago. And different iterations of that series. This was the last one. These were actually, this is called Poison Flower Earrings, and this was from an exhibition many years ago. Maybe some of you guys took part. It was about gold, and I just started thinking about the idea of gold and like reading about like mining practices with gold, and it's sort of a quandary for us as goldsmiths. You know, gold mining is not kind to the environment, but we need to use this material. So I decided to make this piece of homeopathic flowers, so that everything there is homeopathic, and if you take it in small doses, it helps you, but if you take large doses, they're all poison. So that was sort of the last piece from that series. In 2005, I moved back to Ithaca, New York, and it's pretty snowy and cold. It's very far from San Francisco in Ithaca. So I started this sort of black and white series of work, still these silhouettes. And it's, I'd sort of stare out the window, searching for signs of life. And in that really stark landscape, I found birds were like these sort of fleeting bits of life and energy. And I just started to work with that theme and sort of the materials that birds use. Like, that's an eggshell that I gave myself the challenge to prong set an eggshell, which I did, and different kind of found objects. And eventually, like, black and white was just too hard for me. So I went to my husband's architecture studio and started pulling those like plastic laminate chips they have on the wall, and started to make these just really colorful pieces that I sort of think are the opposite of the kind of winter scene. It's more of the idea of like going to IKEA and getting a big colorful cloth and throwing it on your sofa to redecorate. That's what I needed to do. I needed to like bring some burst of life into my work. So back in the day here, there's still some horsehair. I was still hand cutting all these pieces. So this is all Formica laminate, and it's mostly cold connected. And this was the one piece that I had this idea, like I wanted to make a three-dimensional piece of work, and I wanted the pieces to like really lock together tightly, like have that children's toy sort of slide and like snap. And every time I cut them with my jeweler's saw, like I couldn't get that snap. And I thought, okay, like I need to learn laser cutter. I need to learn about CAD drawings. So I was still working with these Formica chips, and I still like to hand draw all my like ovals and shapes, not just sort of pull an oval, because that has a very sort of universal look. So I hand draw everything and convert that into vector drawing. I've been using laser cutters now in a lot of different places, and working this way allows me to have very tight tolerances to sort of transform this planar material into a three-dimensional form, and to just, yeah, I guess make many more pieces that are more elaborate. Here, that's my studio assistant. We had to make this necklace twice, and we hadn't written down the first time how long it was supposed to be. So, so this is the work I'm still making. And alongside sort of my interest in people, I love folk art traditions, and this was a sort of neat piece that we discovered at a junk store in Halifax. So these are all carved wooden components. They're all the same. There's no glue, and they just sort of slot into each other. And with online research, I found out that this thing was called a crown of thorns. It's sort of a hobo tramp art, like woodworking project, and it would have been a picture frame, like you would have put a round picture on it and put it on the wall. So that thing was amazing, and I took that apart, and I had been sort of trying to learn about the possibilities of 3D printing, and you know, we made these shapes of this component. Once we took it apart, we were able to understand the linking system, and it's sort of endlessly variable. So I did give it a try with the 3D printing, but for me, this material is just not quite there yet. Like, I don't like the sort of feel of either the, you know, laser sintered 3D printing or the fused filament. Like, it's a little plasticky, it's a little bit light for me, although it is great for prototyping. So the one on the left actually was 3D printed, and the one on the right is laser cut Formica. So again, this has been really exciting to me to be able to transform this flat planar material into really volumetric forms. So I just thought I'd let this video roll that my 9-year-old shot this morning. So I still do this work with the crown of thorns. It's just sort of like taken over my brain now, figuring out these systems. And I've been in San Francisco about 2 months now, so I have a artist residency at Tech Shop. And my proposal there was to sort of investigate waste materials that happen during digital fabrication. I feel like it's something that's not talked about that often. It was like, make, you know, make your smiley face keychain and make all this stuff. And like, there's a lot of waste, and nobody's kind of talking about that anymore. So I have been looking for ways to reuse those materials, and at the same time, working on just like more iterations of this form. And I have to give my husband, Anton Christensen, who's a trained architect, credit for helping me with these pieces. Like, by working together these 2 months, we've been able to really kind of build the complexity in these pieces. So being in San Francisco, that could be paradise. Working all day at tech shop, having awesome burritos at night, seeing family, sunshine. Even the murals where I live in the Mission, it's like so expressive. Nova Scotia is like fishing shanties and gray skies. So this is sort of another distinct body of work. This is now, golly, this is probably 5 years ago now. I had my first ever artist residency, and it was on the island of Ivaoa, which that's in, Ivaoa is a Marquese island in French Polynesia. When you fly to Tahiti, this island is still 1,000 miles away. So it's the farthest place from any landmass. But if you're a sailor, you might know this region because it's the first set of islands you hit when you sail west from California. So this is a place that most people would think would be paradise. This is kind of the picture of paradise. And with time, it turned out it wasn't paradise for us, but I guess I'll describe the reasons why. The reason why this island is on anybody's radar anymore is because it's the island that Paul Gauguin died on. It's also the island that Jacques Brel died on. Pont-Aven, France, had created an artist residency and a Gauguin museum on this island. It was sort of their sister city. And I applied for this residency. One of my profs at RISD had gone 11 years before, and I applied. I was really hopeful. I saw the plane tickets were really expensive, but I persevered. And it turned out like nobody had come in the 11 preceding years from Robin and me. So I had the Western idea. I got there and I'm like, when are we doing the lecture? I'm going to work with the kids, all this stuff. And they're like, lentement, lentement, slowly, slowly. So I guess they didn't have any expectations from us of what we would be doing there. We lived in a little bungalow, and I just had this outdoor atelier, which I brought my work out to every day. I brought paper, which was completely the wrong material for the tropics. Sort of investigated the art forms there. This is a tiki that we found in the woods, and it's sort of like an amazing time to be on this island. There's this interesting mix of a native culture and then the overlay of sort of Christian culture, because missionaries had come to all these islands. And the people of this island were in a moment of great rediscovery of their culture, their music, their dance, their tattooing. And I think a lot of that is why they were not so interested in us being there. They hadn't had a lot of great luck with people from away coming to their island. So for me, being a jeweler and being interested in adornment and things like that, I just love this sort of natural adornment everywhere. This was the church, and every single week it was something completely different used to ornament the church. And the leis and the headpieces, everything different every week. This was a wedding where the couple loved red, so everybody in the whole village sewed a red outfit. My son went to school there, and I did some projects with his class, and I found the adults on the island they weren't that curious about what we were doing or what I was doing. But also they always wondered where my paintings were. They're like, oh, you're the artist? Where are your paintings? I'm like, don't have any paintings, not going to have any paintings. But the kids, everywhere, are so curious. So the kids would come out, and we would just work with them. These were these funny palm leaf boondoggles that I started to weave from a book I checked out from the Halifax Library that had not been checked out in 12 years. I took that with me. And another amazing thing as a form of adornment that really interested me were the tattoos. So tattooing would have also been sort of a lost art if there hadn't been one German anthropologist who went to the island and documented all the remaining people who still had tattoos. And that was just really amazing to explore. I love this guy's hand tattoo. And the same forms were everywhere, so not just on the body, but on like bowls like this, architecture, textiles. And the other form of adornment that really interested me were these flower headpieces. I mean, the care that went into these. You know, people would get up at 3, 4 in the morning to pick these flowers and make this headpiece. And it's not for show. It's not because like the tour bus is coming through. It's like people just go work in the post office with their headpiece on, and it's just this commitment to beauty and sensuality and smell that was it's very different from where I live. This was like a sort of banana leaf with sandalwood dust and different fragrant herbs that a lot of women would wear every single day in their bun, just because it apparently gave off like kind of a sensual smell. And when I was there, I just, like, the thing that sort of intrigued me were the traditional roles of men and women on the island and how that was kind of changing, and especially as that was expressed through their adornment. So I decided to do just like a very simple project on this island, which was do kind of a gender swap and make adornment for men that was made from flowers and things like that, like the idea of the beautiful woman with the flower tucked behind her ear. And then I made kind of tough adornment for women that, like, the men would have traditionally had this very fearsome tattoo that covered their face, and I sort of made objects for women that sort of took that into account. So these are just made from paper, and sort of when these guys wear these pieces, they can't get their work done anymore, which I like. And these were all, usually when I was making them, there were a lot of workers who would be working on the bungalows we were staying in, and they just got a really big kick out of this. They like, Jolie, oh, Jolie, and it was no problem to photograph on them. So the pieces for women, like if, hair would have been a sign of beauty, I would sort of cover that up. So it's just sort of an experimental paper series. This woman just happened to be wearing that T-shirt when that day I was photographing. And this piece is made from Tapa cloth, which is actually the right sort of material for the tropics. It's like a material, they carve a layer of bark from a tree, like they sort of shave it off, and then with a stone they'll beat it for hours and hours and hours, and the material grows, and it sort of looks like a woven material, but it's just one piece. So those were the pieces I made there, and again, it was really more my connections with the people that were much more interesting to me. But I think in the end, that place was not paradise for us, and it was probably because we couldn't really build a community. We couldn't make a contribution there, and I think that helped me realize that that's what's most important in life. Amazingly enough, on the last day of our experience there, I had a show, and I had a little project where I asked everybody on the island, what is your idea of paradise? And I would say like 99% said, here, now. Like, just with my family, right here, everything's perfect. And that's kind of amazing, right? I wonder if you'd ask people in New York on the street, like, where paradise is, if they'd all say, it's just here and now. I see I didn't use San Francisco as an example, because you guys would probably all say, yeah. So when I got back to Halifax, I always wanted to make sort of a distinct body of work that was sort of a reaction to that experience. And as the time went on, there's just like no parallel with my life in Nova Scotia and my life on this island. Like, it became really difficult, but I didn't feel like I had kind of completed that cycle. So I gave myself the assignment, just like I give my students, like, you have to make something, pick what was most interesting about that experience. And I think most people responded to the images of men wearing jewelry. And I just started to think about the idea of adornment for men. There isn't much of it. Why not? With this sort of Internet of Things and everybody's searching online, still men are not wearing that much stuff. Why? And like, how far could we push that? And this series was all white because I sort of thought it was bereft of all the color that was from actually living there. So this is just a process shot for this very, very heavy marble necklace that I made. That's marble and steel. And but some is big, bold, mostly made for men. How heavy is too heavy? What are the limits of personal ornamentation? These pieces were all hand sewn out of Tyvek, so this one is a very lightweight piece. And my studio assistant in Halifax, like usual, something had to get shipped out in 2 days. I'm like, Lydia, like we need to photograph these pieces on men. Like where can we find some men? And she's like, well, I work at the barber shop. Just come in on Saturday and we'll just photograph them on everybody coming in. And that was great. That worked out perfect. So she was cutting hair, and just like everybody said yes. So these are sort of earpieces that are worn over the top of your ear. And this is a piece, this is porcelain and like forged iron hand pieces and like sort of a silver inlay. I was able to close the iron on the porcelain and not crack it. So these are just sort of ritual pieces. Again, you can't get your work done when you're wearing these. And these are sawn silver, and this is laser cut Tyvek. I had the idea to make like highbrow and lowbrow pieces. So rather than getting like the tribal tattoo on your arm, you could just have this piece safety pinned to the edge of your t-shirt. And this was like, once I made that beard in the Tapa cloth and the paper, I just like knew I had to make the beard out of all porcelain. So this, like, that was not a wise idea to make a beard out of all porcelain and silver, but it's a material that I've been using for a couple of years called Caraflex, which is like very thin sheets of porcelain that you get in the green state. It's sort of bendy, like roofing rubber. And you can cut it, and you can tab it, and you can glue it together with their slurry glue. And then when you fire it, it's cone 10 porcelain. And it's got this beautiful kind of translucent quality, but it's a little bit delicate. So porcelain beard one time. So now I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and I would say that's really paradise. I'm there with my family. I have amazing students at the school I teach at, which is called Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And I have the ability to make my work, and that brings me a lot of joy. I'll just say a little bit about NASCAD in case anybody's ever interested in doing exchange there. We have 3 different buildings. It's kind of an urban campus, so urban in Nova Scotia style. And this is the building that I teach on. It's sort of like a modern building right on the waterfront, and that's the view out some of our drawing studios. This is a ceramic studio, and these are the jewelry studios back at a different building. And I've had some amazing students over the years, and I thought I'd just highlight the work of a couple of them. So Aura Lee just graduated, and she's got an amazing brain, like just a journal to die for. And she was an illustrator before she was a jeweler, and she's just got these characters that are like so joyful and whimsical and just feats of the imagination. And like the head on this brooch on the left, I think she made it like 12 times. She enameled it 12 times because it didn't come out like her drawing. Just this tenacity and commitment to her pieces. And this is all enamel on silver or copper, and I think some of her settings are powder coated. And she did this in my ceramics class where she illustrated. We were studying folk art traditions, and she picked the tradition of confetti, and so she made porcelain confetti and this purse and a shovel, and also eyeglasses. So this was another student who had been doing Benham Harper. He had been doing a lot of fabrication with steel, and noticing when he was filing the steel that everything was getting magnetized. So rather than fighting that, he decided to go with that, and he set magnets in different places in his work and made this really beautiful series of sort of hairy jewelry. And this is my former studio assistant, Lydia Buxton, who just moved to Vancouver. And she's just doing a wonderful job balancing sort of art jewelry with a production line, really spends a lot of time photographing her work and doing different things. And that is the end of my talk. And if you have any questions about things that I mentioned during the talk, feel free to email me. And I did bring one piece of jewelry here too for you to see. Does anybody happen to have any questions? I think we're getting another mic. Anybody want to get up and ask the first question? Crickets. I have a good question for you. Okay, Kelly, thank you. I'm just kind of amazed how you've managed to sort of pick up your family and move to all these amazing places. How do you balance having them come with you to all these residencies and do your work? Well, there's a book I really like called, I think it's called Artist Communities, and it's sort of out of print now, but it's a wonderful book that's available on Amazon. My school library won't buy it because it's older, and they say, oh, you can just look at Res Arts or whatever. But it's great to have a paper book that lists really clearly different residencies around America and the world, and then if they pay you, if you need to pay them, if you can bring your family, if you can bring your dog, like it's just, there's like an Excel spreadsheet. So for me, I just could go through and see really quickly what would be a possibility or not. And I think just we're pretty flexible. I mean, we only have one kid, and we don't mind taking him out of school. And so we always figure he'll be learning more on these adventures than in Canadian school. Maybe I shouldn't say that. And I think, you know what, we just keep our expenses really low at home. I think a lot of people forget about that. We keep it really simple. You know, this year we packed up our house and rented it out, sold the big things, and it gave us the flexibility to hit the road for a year. And like just preparing this talk, like looking back over the images of India, like, I mean, who gets to do that? Like with your family for 3 months, it's like, yeah, I think it's, but I guess, I don't know if that describes like how I do it or why. We just, don't have many things, take your kids out of school, hit the road. So I'd have to figure out how to bring my cat. Exactly. Anybody else have any questions? Harriet? Yeah, it's interesting. We actually switched roles when we moved to Halifax. So he takes care of our son in the house, and he renovates, and I work full time. So that's how we manage that. And that's challenging. You know, when our son went to kindergarten, on the playground, everybody was like, oh, yeah, your son's in school. Like, when are you going to get a job? When are you going back to work? And I don't know if they would have asked me that, but they asked him that, and we're like, Lantima, like we're okay. We're okay the way we are. And actually, for that to work for us, it means when I have summer vacation, we can all go.
Okay, I really wanted to ask about that husband question too. Just wouldn't work for everybody's life. But would you like to tell us more about the tech shop? Not everybody might know about the tech shop.
Yeah, of course. So tech shop is pretty wild place that you have here in San Francisco. I came out a year ago. My sister usually lives here, and I did a couple classes there, and I just thought, like, how can I get back there? So it's a building. The one in San Francisco is at 926 Howard Street, Howard and 3rd. You pay a monthly membership fee. I think it's like $150. And you have full access to every machine they have there. They have a metal shop with lathes. They have a wood shop, full wood shop, the powder coating. They have a bunch of laser cutters. They have a water jet cutter. They have full sewing things. Like people from the Academy of Art go there to do sewing. They have industrial sergers and vinyl cutters. And it's interesting to me because it's a completely different model from academia. Like at my school, it's always very expensive to hire technicians, and we like buy machines and they stay in boxes because there's no like technician assigned to them. The tech shop model is like completely different. It's like all the machines, you take a 3-hour course and they cost money. That's where they sort of earn their money. And then they give you the keys to the machines. And it's completely different, but it seems to work. Like we have not broken the laser cutter or anything like that. And they sort of have people floating around who will help you. But I think they said they have something like 900 members, like people who have paid monthly membership, but there's sort of like 20 people working there at a time. And they, like some of the people I've talked to there have said that it is a little bit daunting coming in there, like especially it's a different model. It might be people without a design or an art background, so they come in and they're shown like the chop saw and the table saw, and then they don't know where to start. So actually I think having an artist in residence program there would really benefit them, from them seeing artists like in the middle of a research process sort of working and getting somewhere. It's mostly boys working in there, and there's a lot of robot making going on. There's a lot of robot making, and there's a lot of Burning Man projects going on there. They're like, you're lucky you're not here at Burning Man time because it will be packed. And then a lot of people have like their Etsy jewelry business that they're cutting things out on the laser for that. But if you can get over that hurdle of it being a little bit daunting getting in there, it's sort of an amazing idea because nobody could afford to have these machines in their workshop, and they're all there, and $150 a month is pretty reasonable to have access to that. So does that answer that question, or?
I wanted to know a little bit more about when you were talking about the 3D printing, and just more descriptive about, you said it was very plastic feeling and light.
Yeah.
And I forget, there was the necklace on the left was the 3D printed, and then it was this one.
Right.
Which then you said was all laser cut, correct?
Right.
So I'm just very conflicted about the 3D printing because like anybody could be a jeweler right now, right? I mean, there's just so much work being done in the jewelry world, and I'm finding a lot of it looks alike, you know, looks, and just a little bit more expounding on that, I guess.
I struggle with that too. I find, you know, it was the same amount of work to make that piece or a 3D printed one, and it was pretty complex to figure out how the pieces interlock. But once I got the piece back from Shapeways and I assembled it, and I just picked it up and I had the feeling, cheap. Like all this work, and it had this feeling of like $100 necklace, and like even like the parts were already more than $100, and I didn't have the feeling that it could be sold for like very much more. But I did send one of those to Noel, our shared gallerist in Montreal, and he disagreed with me. Like he thought those pieces in particular were different because they were not trying to look like something that already exists. Like a lot of 3D printing is like an amoeba parabola shape, which is the shape you can pull in the design programs, or like a birdie like in a bird cage, or like a silhouette of like a diamond ring. So I think that's like, I'm sorry if someone's made like a silhouette of a diamond ring, but it's sort of like deeply uninteresting. Like we see that and we're like, oh. And I think for prototyping, it's probably really great. Like my cousin Bill Cass is here, and he's a shoe designer by day and other things on the weekend. But you were saying when you prototype shoes, actually that's made the process quite nimble, and it must be like the perfect process for that. Or like, I know like in Tiffany's in New York, like when they make your diamond engagement ring, it's not like a guy like at the bench anymore. Like they do the CAD drawing and they scale it up to your size, and they CAD or something, a wax, and then they cast that. So it's used in a lot of different ways, and sometimes it has the finesse, but certainly like a lot of another thing you're struggling with is that that idea that like everybody can make it. Like now that we have like Shapeways or Pinocchio, like everybody's a designer, and they're definitely skipping over a lot of steps. That it's well, it goes without saying that it's not so easy to be a designer if you want to make something truly interesting. And also you have to learn tons of software that's also not easy. And before you do that, like really nothing you make is interesting. But maybe the public is like okay with like a lower level of interesting. That's definitely true for photography.
That was a really intense answer.
I think about that a lot too.
So Rebecca, we have a question from online. The question is from Alpa. Your work covers the use of different materials and techniques. Does your inspiration lead you to the choice of materials and techniques, or are you inspired by them first, your materials?
I think I've heard it described like magpie eye, and I'm sure like all of us are the same here in this room with like drawers filled with things that caught your fancy. And I'm like that too, but now I made a rule that it can, only stay in my house for like 2 years and has to go out if I don't do something with it. But just like the 3D printing, that's the real challenge. When you find a material, it's not interesting yet. It's like what you're going to do with it. And for example, the Caraflex, like the porcelain paper I use, I spent 1 year researching, working with that material, not making any jewelry, like not thinking about jewelry, how it was going to have a finding or work. I only wanted to know the strengths and limitations of that material, and just working that way. And at the end of the year, I sort of, analyzed, can this become jewelry? And in some formats it could, and some I had to abandon. So definitely magpie eye, but then like sort of a research process that goes with that.
Okay, guys, any other questions?
So you talked about your time at Tech Lab. Your proposal was to utilize waste from laser cutting. Were you designing that waste into your product, or were you using other people's refuse from the process?
No. I mean, I guess I've always had waste from my processes, which has troubled me. Like when I cut for mica, I don't use the chips anymore. I buy like 4x8 sheets, rip them down into size in the wood shop, and I have a big sheet that I cut out my pieces, and then there's waste. It's very like colorful and beautiful, and I've always felt bad throwing it away, so we have stacks of this. And I wanted to resolve that, and also when I got to Tech Shop, I saw they don't recycle much there, and there's tons of waste there, because for people there, like time is more valuable than material or money, I think. So they'll, have a big piece of acrylic and cut out a rectangle and like toss it in the garbage and then take their rectangle. So I've been trying to come up with designs that could utilize like their waste and my waste. There's a lot of programs that can sort of nest shapes and material, like to use the most you could, but that only works if it's your own drawing. So I've made smaller drawings that I can like nest on other people's material and cut out. I've used the materials as stencils and worked with kids and investigated where they actually could recycle their plexi and acrylics here, which like Tapa plastics, for example, like there are ways to recycle number 7 plastics. So there's like using the most you can, there's like the recycling, and then sort of like trying to make, I guess, trash out of treasure, which also is like the 3D printing really, really hard for me. Like when things are kind of junky, like I don't like it. So it's like a good assignment for me to make something not sort of like junky feeling from this waste material. So nothing's been pictured here. It's like not ready for the prime time yet.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, I have one more. So you described Nova Scotia as sort of like a little bit fishing village / podunk / kind of out in the middle of nowhere a little bit. Your work, though, is very modern. You use a lot of bright colors and silhouettes and things like that. And then the images of your school are also quite modern. I'm wondering how those worlds meet in Nova Scotia for you.
Well, like I'm probably like doing my school a little bit of a disservice because it's actually like pretty well known in the 70s. It was very well known for the conceptual art movement, like Vito Acconci and, Anne Hamilton or like Adrian Piper. All these people came up to Nova Scotia because they had a projects class where they like contacted these artists and they were like, give us any assignment for the students and we'll spend a whole semester doing it. And so they had assignments like gluing a zillion pennies to something, or like writing something a million, or like pressing yourself on a wall, and a lot of these like New York artists were so intrigued with this that they came to Nova Scotia. So it was this like sort of like hotbed of the conceptual movement, and it's still like that's everywhere now. And now we're Canada only has a couple art schools, so we're still well known for like craft and fine art and other things. I guess it doesn't influence me that much. Like I have spent a couple years there researching dazzle camouflage, and I did a residency at Banff recently to investigate that, and that I discovered in Nova Scotia because we are on a working harbor port, and this sort of tradition of like painting warships in wild patterns. Like I saw that in the museum. So I think that has influenced me, but it's just like taken a while to show itself in my work. And what I do think is great about Nova Scotia is like I can just get my work done. Like I know the laser cutter, I know the wood shop, and that's what I struggled with coming to San Francisco, like ramping up to like find everything again. But now I found it, so I can stay forever here. Yeah.
I had a question about the Artisan Residency. It seems that this is like really tough. I don't mean to give you a really hard time, but why do you have to go to Artisan Residency? Why can't you do it by yourself or on your own, or the Artisan Residency is like a external structure to your research. They're not actually paying you most of the time. I doubt that.
Yeah.
So it actually costs you something to go there.
Right. I think my first residency was in Ivaoa, and I got that one the same time I got a full-time job in Nova Scotia. So I sort of thought, work full-time, go to Tahiti, like what should I do? So I decided to take the full-time job, but I negotiated in 1.5 years that I could go in that residency. And that was just sort of like a big hurrah. Like my husband's work was getting slow. I was driving 8 hours a week to teach at RISD. I loved teaching. He didn't love his work anymore. I was like, fine, like let's just sell our house, apply to these residencies, go woofing, whatever. And sort of like everything I applied for worked out. So I decided to work full-time and go to Tahiti. And that was just, maybe it was more travel, adventure. Like it didn't have so much to do with art. When I went to Banff recently, I had to go. I had been chair of my department for 2 years, and when I would open my laptop in the morning, there would be 150 emails. So I applied to a residency at Banff. It was only 1 month. My family didn't come, and I just closed the laptop and I didn't open it again. And there was not a way for me to do that staying in Halifax. And the Banff residencies are completely self-structured. So I did the project that I wanted to do that I had never forced myself to do while I was working at home. And this residency here, I mean, it could have not been a residency. It's mostly not really a residency, but it's just I got free access to Tech Shop for 2 months.
Okay.
Does that did I answer it, or am I skirting the issues? Like, I get work done when I'm at home too, but I think you can see from my history, like I usually either quit my job or leave that country every 5 years, like on the dot. So that was going to happen in Halifax, but then I had the sabbatical year carrot like at year 7. So year 5 we were like struggling. We made it to year 7, and it's been like a pretty delightful year.
It sounds pretty amazing. We have one more question from online, and I guess we'll wrap up with that. Can you tell us more about your time working at the Otto Kinsley Academy, and what was it like to just create without parameters or feedback?
Yeah, that's sort of a big question. I'll keep it kind of simple. I didn't know any other way. I hadn't researched so many grad schools. Like a lot of my profs at RISD were German, and I just knew after 5 years of working full time, I wanted to focus on my practice again. That was the only school I really considered. That school is free, even for foreigners. And it was, I'm glad I had the 5 years there, because the first year was like a wash of trying to get used to being in that country. And maybe what Otto did with, being very choosy about the student body worked, because, those are still my friends for life and colleagues around the world, and we participate in different exhibitions or do talks in different countries. And I did struggle a little bit, like, to be honest. When I came back to the States, I would be teaching at RISD, and when sort of crit time came, there's a language that you learn in American graduate schools that I didn't learn. Like, I was learning German, and everybody here was reading like theoretical text and doing a lot of writing and taking seminar classes, and they were learning that language, and that's like not the German way. The German way is like the work speaks for itself. That's it. And so when I was in these crits, I realized that we'd be talking about the work, but people are like, well, Heidegger said this, and then Walter Benjamin came in. I'm like, wait, what are you guys talking about? And I have some like deep questions about that. I'm not sure which way is right, but I think it's worth investigating if you're researching MFA options. That it's quite a different model here, which I think actually the North American model is it's actually good if you want to stay in North America and apply for grants and be an excellent writer and things like that. But it's different for sure, and like it's different in Sweden and Israel and Korea. So I would research that really carefully, which kind of program you'd like.
Okay, any other questions? We're good? Okay, well, thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you, everybody.